Welcome back to History Recapped, the channel where we dive deep into the stories that shaped our world. Today we uncover the untold story of one of the most dramatic and politically explosive conflicts of the 20th century, the Falklands War. This is a tale of pride and power, of nations pushed to the brink, and of a small cluster of islands in the South Atlantic that sparked a war 8,000 miles from home. From secret diplomatic failures to daring military strategies, and from devastating naval battles to fierce hand-to-hand combat in the freezing darkness, this is the definitive cinematic retelling of the Falklands War. The stage is set, 1500s 1982. The Falkland Islands, known in Argentina as the Islas Malvinas, are a small, windswept archipelago in the South Atlantic Ocean. On the surface they appear unremarkable. A cold, remote cluster of rocky islands, battered by fierce Antarctic winds, home to fewer than 2,000 civilians in 1982, mostly sheep farmers, fishermen and their families. But beneath this isolation lies a history steeped in centuries of geopolitical rivalry. For hundreds of years, the Falklands were seen as a strategic outpost in the southern hemisphere. First sighted by European sailors in the early 1500s, they became a pawn in a game of imperial ambition. By the 18th century, France, Britain and Spain each staked claims. In 1764, France established the settlement of Port Louis, only for Spain to demand control 2 years later. By the late 18th century, the Spanish governed the islands from Buenos Aires, integrating them into the viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata. When Argentina declared independence from Spain in 1816, it claimed the Falklands as part of its new republic. But in 1833, Britain dispatched HMS Clio to reassert control, expelling Argentine forces and establishing a permanent presence. Britain maintained control almost uninterrupted for nearly 150 years, despite Argentina's protests. Throughout the 20th century, the issue of sovereignty simmered beneath the surface. In 1965, the United Nations passed Resolution 2065, calling for negotiations between Britain and Argentina. Talks dragged on for years but failed to produce agreement. Argentina never relinquished its claim, and Britain never wavered in its determination to defend the islanders' right to remain British. By the early 1980s, the Falklands dispute was no longer just a diplomatic matter. It had become a symbol of national pride on both sides. For Britain, the islands represented its enduring role as a global power, protecting citizens thousands of miles away. For Argentina, they were a painful reminder of colonial humiliation and an opportunity to restore lost dignity. The Road to War, 1976-1982. To understand why war erupted in 1982, we need to examine the domestic crises consuming both nations. Argentina in turmoil. In the late 1970s, Argentina was ruled by a brutal military dictatorship, the junta, led by General Leopoldo Galtieri. The regime had seized power in 1976, promising stability but delivering fear and repression. Known as the Dirty War, thousands of suspected dissidents were kidnapped, tortured and killed. Economically, the country was collapsing. Inflation soared above 100%, unemployment grew, and confidence in the government plummeted. The Falklands, or Islas Malvinas, offered Galtieri and his generals a lifeline. Reclaiming them could unite Argentina behind the junta, distract from domestic failures, and restore national honor. Britain in decline across the Atlantic. Britain faced its own crisis. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher's government, elected in 1979, struggled to manage spiraling unemployment and a shrinking economy. Thatcher herself was deeply unpopular, and defense cuts raised concerns about Britain's global strength. In 1981, the government announced plans to withdraw HMS Endurance, the Royal Navy's Antarctic patrol ship, a signal Argentina interpreted as declining British interest in defending the islands. Diplomatic missteps. Throughout 1981, diplomatic negotiations continued but faltered. Argentina believed Britain lacked the will to fight. Britain underestimated Argentina's desperation. Signals were misread, intentions misunderstood. On March 19, 1982, tensions boiled over when a group of Argentine scrap metal workers, escorted by armed Marines, raised Argentina's flag on the island of South Georgia. Technically part of the Falklands dependency, London demanded their withdrawal, Buenos Aires refused. The countdown to war had begun. The invasion of the Falklands, April 2nd, 1982. At 4:30 a.m. on April 2nd, 1982, under cover of darkness, the Argentine Navy launched Operation Rosario, the code name for the seizure of the Falkland Islands. A fleet of warships, transports and landing craft approached the islands, carrying over 600 elite Marines from Argentina's amphibious commandos group. The assault began at Mullet Creek, just south of the Falklands capital, Stanley. Standing against them were just 80 Royal Marines from Naval Party 8901. Commanded by Major Mike Norman. Armed with light machine guns and small arms, they faced overwhelming odds. As Argentine forces advanced, fierce skirmishes erupted. Machine gun fire rattled through Stanley's streets. Mortar rounds exploded near government buildings. The defenders fought with precision and bravery, destroying several Argentine vehicles and holding key positions for hours. But by 8:45 a.m., realizing they were surrounded and outgunned, Major Norman ordered a ceasefire. Governor Rex Hunt instructed his men to surrender to avoid civilian casualties. At 9 a.m., the Argentine flag was raised over Government House. Across Argentina, celebrations erupted. Buenos Aires proclaimed a bloodless victory. But in London, the news had the opposite effect. Margaret Thatcher declared war inevitable. The Falkland Islands are British, they remain British, and the islanders wish them to be British. We shall defend them. Argentina believed Britain would back down, but they had miscalculated badly. Britain mobilizes. April 5th, May 1982. Within 3 days of the invasion, Britain responded with one of the most ambitious naval mobilizations since World War II. On April 5th, the first elements of a 100-ship task force set sail from Portsmouth, Plymouth and Rosyth. Leading the fleet were the aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, escorted by destroyers, frigates, submarines and replenishment vessels. 28,000 personnel were deployed, supported by a global logistical chain spanning 8,000 miles to the South Atlantic. Among the key assets were HMS Conqueror, a nuclear-powered submarine that would play a decisive role later. Harrier jump jets launched from carriers to dominate the skies. Royal Fleet auxiliary support ships ensuring constant fuel, ammunition and food resupply. Behind the scenes, political stakes were enormous. Thatcher knew failure would destroy her government and Britain's credibility as a global power. In her words, this was not simply about the Falklands, it was about Britain's standing in the world. Across the Atlantic, Argentina fortified its positions. Over 10,000 Argentine troops were stationed on the islands, supported by Mirage fighters, Super Étendard jets and Exocet missiles. Both nations prepared for a confrontation that would define their histories. The Air and Naval War, May 1st, May 25th, 1982. On May 1st, 1982, the British launched their first offensive, Operation Black Buck. 2 Avro Vulcan bombers took off from Ascension Island, flying over 8,000 miles with support from 11 aerial refuelings, a logistical masterpiece. Their mission: cripple Stanley's airfield. Though the damage was limited, the psychological impact was immense. Argentina realized that Britain could strike anywhere, anytime. Days later, Argentine forces retaliated. On May 2nd, the British submarine HMS Conqueror sank the cruiser ARA General Belgrano, killing 323 sailors. The event shocked Argentina and changed naval strategy instantly. Its surface fleet retreated to port, leaving air power as Argentina's primary weapon. Then came the most feared weapon of the war, the Exocet missile. On May 4th, an Argentine Super Étendard fired an Exocet that struck HMS Sheffield, killing 20 crew members and setting the ship ablaze. It was the Royal Navy's first loss in combat since World War II. From May 21st, British troops began landing at San Carlos Water under relentless Argentine air attacks. The area became known as Bomb Alley, as Argentine pilots braved British defences to attack landing ships. Despite heavy losses, the British established a secure beachhead, setting the stage for the ground war. The fight for the islands, May 27th, June 14th, 1982. With their foothold secured, British forces began a slow, brutal advance across the Falklands. The terrain was unforgiving: freezing rain, boggy peat, and constant Argentine artillery fire. Soldiers carried 90-pound packs over miles of exposed ridgelines, often marching through the night. Key battles defined the campaign: Battle of Goose Green, May 28-29, British Tupara, led by Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones, attacked 1,000 Argentine troops entrenched in strong defensive positions. After fierce fighting, Jones was killed leading a charge and posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. Mount Longdon, Two Sisters and Mount Harriet, June 11th, 12 British commandos conducted coordinated night assaults in freezing darkness using bayonets and grenades to overwhelm Argentine positions. Mount Tumbledown, June 13th. The Scots Guards fought a savage battle through minefields and sniper fire, suffering heavy casualties but finally breaking Argentine resistance. By June 14, 1982, British forces surrounded Stanley. Facing certain defeat, Argentine Commander General Mario Menendez surrendered. The Union Jack was raised over Government House once more. Victory, defeat, and legacy. The Falklands War lasted just 74 days, but its consequences were profound. For Britain, 255 dead and 775 wounded. A revitalized sense of national pride, political dominance for Margaret Thatcher, who won a landslide re-election for Argentina, 649 dead and 1,200 wounded. Collapse of the military, junta, a return to democracy by 1983. The war also transformed military doctrine worldwide. The Exocet missile forced navies to rethink ship defense systems. Britain upgraded its amphibious warfare and air defense capabilities. The Falklands became one of the most heavily defended territories on Earth. 4 decades later, the Falklands, or Islas Malvinas, remain disputed. Britain maintains a permanent military garrison and invests heavily in island defense. Argentina still claims sovereignty. For veterans, the war remains deeply personal. Many return scarred by cold, exhaustion, and trauma. Others remain haunted by memories of comrades lost in battle. But beyond politics, the Falklands War stands as a reminder of how small places can trigger global consequences. A clash of pride, strategy, and identity. The Falklands War lasted just 74 days, but its impact still echoes across the South Atlantic and beyond. A story of pride, power, and sacrifice, of soldiers who fought in freezing darkness, leaders who gambled on glory, and a world that watched two nations collide over a cluster of windswept islands at the edge of the world. But our journey through history doesn't end here. If you want to explore more of the battles, empires, and untold stories that shaped our world, make sure you like this video. It really helps us grow. Subscribe to History Recapped for more deep dive documentaries. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next cinematic release. And we'd love to hear from you. Comment below, what's the most surprising fact you learned about the Falklands War? Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep discovering the stories that built our world.